Okay, everyone, so we're going to start this session. Welcome everyone to this new session of Innovation Wednesdays. So our last session on Latin America and the Caribbean's response to COVID-19 was very successful, and it gave an interesting regional perspective. Before we start, let me introduce myself. I'm Rachel Lopez. I'm an outreach and reporting consultant for PSE, so the Emergency and Resilience Division. I will be your moderator for today, and together with my co-facilitators, so we have Lorenzo Gentile, Maria Paula Carretero, and Catherine Forkraut from the Marketing and Resource Mobilization Division, as well as Maria Benedetto from the Forestry Division. So of course, if you have any technical questions or if you have any issues with Zoom, please feel free to send them a private message and they will help you with any problem you have. We're asking you, of course, to keep your microphones mute throughout the presentations. So let me give you a brief introduction on Innovation Wednesdays. So it's a bi-monthly incubator using the power of youth to spark changes and make FAO a better and more productive place to work. It's a grassroots initiative that works on a voluntary basis. So really, everyone is welcome to take part in organizing it. If you have, for example, any guest presenter in mind, or if you'd like to help to organize, you can send an email to youth-committee@fao.org. You'll find the email in the chat box. So today's presentation will be all about innovation and flexibility in times of crises. As we know, emergencies are inherently messy, let's say, as there is a need to make system and procedures go faster within the organization. There is, of course, a specific need to do so in times of crises in order to deliver effective and rapid support to people in need. While this creates obvious challenges, there is always space within emergencies to innovate. New funding sources, new ideas, new ways of working, and of course the fast-paced environment creates opportunity for innovation. So today's agenda is an hour-long session that includes 3 presentations and 1 Dare to Ask session. The first presentation will be held by Kazuki Kitaoka, the head of the Marketing, Outreach and Reporting Unit. He will be giving a presentation on program marketing in times of crises. Then we will have a presentation from Hila Cohen, head of business development in WFP's Innovation Accelerator. She will be presenting on an innovative response to uncertainty. And finally, we'll have Catherine Jones, Technical Officer for Early Warning, Early Action in the Emergency Division. And she will be giving us a presentation on using innovative methods to anticipate food crises. Then we will be opening the floor for a Q&A to the presenters. You can ask your question directly in the chat box. Then you will be moving on to the Dare to Ask session with PSE Director Dominique Burgeon, again using the chat box for your questions. And finally, we will end with updates on the Progress at FAO initiative that will be done by Lindsay Hook. So let me briefly introduce our first presenter. Kazuki Kitaoka is the head of the Outreach, Marketing and Reporting Unit. Prior to joining FAO, he led the Strategic Planning and Coordination Unit for several years at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization and managed various global consultations and outreach activities. He joined the UN system in 2003 for the implementation of private sector development, industrial technology, and corporate responsibility programs in various countries, including China, Indonesia, Nigeria, and the United Republic of Tanzania. So without further ado, let me give the floor to you, Kazuki, for a presentation on program marketing in times of crises.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for this great introduction. And I jump right into the 7 minutes that I have for this big topic, program marketing. And of course, we can't cover everything, but Lorenzo, if you can put my presentation on. Program marketing, what is actually program marketing? It is really something that, if you look at the next slide, it's going very fast, Lorenzo, sorry. It's, in the end, it is about effective political marketing. And I did for about a year ago a presentation on political marketing, so I don't want to repeat anything, but in short, it is all about the simplicity of our message, of our technical message, the frequency in which we are producing that message to our audiences, the consistency with which we are producing this message, and of course the supporting imagery. And in the end, we hope that with this 4-pillar approach to political marketing, we get the vote, and of course also in the end, the resources that we need for our programs and activities. Next. Yeah, this is the program. And here, I was also presenting at the time the importance of looking at different parts of our recipient's brain. So looking at a human receptor for marketing messages, for any type of message, as a matter of fact. Very often we are only looking at either the rational brain, we are trying to explain the facts and the figures and why it is important and so on, or we try to make people fear. This is really important because you will die, or the people will die, or something, a flood is going to come. These are 2 different parts of the brain which are important, but the actual really important and sticking brain where messages will stay for longer and will also be taken with more empathy is the middle brain, the emotional brain, and which is why we need to look at marketing messaging, marketing imagery through the lens of this emotional brain, in addition, of course, to the factual correctness and the technical activity, the technical information that we are giving. Next. And this is not new. Very important figurehead Maya Angelou said that already a long time ago. I've learned that people will forget what you said and what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel at a certain point. So, and this is essentially where we have to try to capture our partners. And the crisis at the moment, next, is making that, of course, more complicated. We don't necessarily meet our partners. We don't have the possibility to have a face-to-face chat to make them emotionally connected to our activities, bring them to our fields, programs. But what we can do is use this crisis that we had and this new reality in which everybody is connected through phones, through computers. We are interfacing today the world with a completely different eye than we did probably 4 months or 5 months ago. And this is, of course, we're linking through these technical digital media much more to our loved ones, but in the case of FAO, for instance, also to work. Of course, this Innovation Wednesdays is a good example for it. And in the end, also for consuming content. So for the consummation of content, of course, for marketers is an extremely important aspect to look at, because the eye has changed over the last 4 months, and not only for you, for me, but also for our policymakers and their families and those who are making decisions on program funding. Next. So what does it really mean to do brand building and marketing during these type of crises that we have now? I found it interesting to look at this Facebook coronavirus research that was done recently. And they saw that smartphone time has been, for instance, going up 70%. That is amazing. And new coverage has been looked at in terms of 67, it's gone up by 67%. Show streaming, Netflix, but also on different media has gone up by 50%, and so on. I think we can see that also in our own realities. So these are quite impressive numbers. And once the crisis is over, hopefully at some point, these figures might go slightly down, but there is a new reality that will have been created through this crisis. And we need to look at that also in our communications, marketing, and brand building approaches. Next. And of course, most importantly, video calls. And this is the 70% up here is only for messenger group calls. So these are families that are connecting through messenger groups, 70% up. It's not even looking at the Zoom calls and WebEx calls and all of the other professional calls that we have. So here, not only the personal culture, but also the professional culture has changed in terms of how we connect to our work environments, to our colleagues, but also to content that is out in the web. Next. The other trend that we see is that there are more and more global support networks, and they're much more important than before. And of course, because we couldn't meet. So Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups, and other groups that were created on digital platforms have become a really important source for content sharing, content exchange, discussions, and also in some cases decision-making, support structures, emergency structures, and so on. Next. And finally, and this is really important, there is a real desire to come together for real-time experience. There is the desire to be connected is so big and has been really growing to almost discard content that is on the social media and other platforms that are not felt as authentic and real. So live concerts, live talks, live discussions, Innovation Wednesdays, these are the kind of connection points that have gone up considerably. And only in the United States, for instance, live real-time events have gone up by 50%. That's an enormous amount of content that has been created now live, before, which was before perhaps recorded or as part of a movie streaming or similar. Next. So what does it mean for marketing? It is really important, and I think that is now the learning for us at FAO as well and in the UN, that we need to authentically acknowledge that there is a crisis today which has completely changed, or quite a lot changed, the norm in which we work, in which we connect, and in which we consume content. And our FAO brand will strive in the future, I'm sure, if we embrace that through digital community experiences that are real, authentic, live, and that embrace these kind of digital communities of people. Next. That are comprised of groups of people that have shared passions and expertise, which we have around us already in our topics, and of course, similar situations. And this will mean that we will have to rethink how we connect through these platforms that we have with the middle brains in the end of these communities and groups. Next. Because we should never forget that in the end, decisions, any decision, work decisions are affected by a certain unconscious bias, a positive or a negative one. And also our policymakers interpret us with a certain unconscious bias. So if we connect with them, if we connect with our partners, if we connect with all those groups and stakeholders that are already, from a sentiment point of view, linked to our messages and our mandate, I'm sure that we can have a very successful marketing future in this new norm of hopefully at some point post-crisis marketing world and working world and world overall. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kazuki, for this very insightful presentation. So you talked about effective political marketing, and the clear importance of brand building and using the technology to our benefit, like using social media, support networks, and so on. Finally, you stressed on the big desire to stay connected, as you called it, real-time experience. And I think we all experienced that through the confinement period we had a few weeks ago. You finally said that FAO should embrace digital communities of people. So thank you very much for this presentation. We will now move on to our next presenter. I'm going to introduce her shortly. It's Hila Cohen. She is the head of business development at WFP's Innovation Accelerator, which was launched in August 2015. So the accelerator identifies, nurtures, and scales startups and entrepreneurs that accelerate progress towards zero hunger. Innovations supported by the accelerator are in the realms of agri-tech, supply chain, and technology. So for example, artificial intelligence and blockchains. Hila worked in WFP for 3.5 years before joining the Innovation Accelerator in 2015. Beforehand, she worked for 4 years as a high-tech corporate lawyer in a leading firm in Tel Aviv. She holds an MBA from the SDA Bocconi School of Management in Italy and a bachelor's in law from the University of Haifa in Israel. So Hila, over to you for a presentation on an innovative response to uncertainty.
Thanks so much. And if you want to launch on the presentation. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to the FAO youth group. It's great that you gave us this opportunity to speak here, and it's great to share our work with the global FAO network. So we can start with the next slide. So I work in WFP's Innovation Accelerator. It's a structure that was built and launched 5 years ago. We are based in Munich, Germany, and we support innovations around the world. Our goal is to connect between the latest developments in the innovation world and innovation realm and translate them to the reality where WFP operates. So we accept teams, whether they're NGOs, startups, WFP internal teams, and actually it could be teams from FAO. And they can take part in our program. I'll just give a few words about that. So what we do is that we look at frontier innovations like blockchain and artificial intelligence, and we see how they can be translated to the realities where we operate. What we also do is actually actively source for innovation. So teams can apply on our website. It's innovation.wfp.org. And again, as I mentioned, it could be a startup, it could be an NGO. It could be a WFP internal team. And then they would be invited to a 5-day program. Until a few months ago, they would be usually invited to Munich, but we've also run a boot camp in Dar es Salaam and in San Francisco. And during those 5 days, we really go on an innovation journey with that specific team. If it's an external team to WFP, we would make them with a country office from WFP. So actually, the goal is to actually implement a pilot. So the innovation boot camps that we do is a pre-phase in order to actually implement innovation as part of our sprint program. So just in terms of numbers, to date, we've received more than 5,000 applications to our program. We've run 26 boot camps for WFP and also for other organizations. We've supported more than 80 projects around the world in our country offices. And now we're also really focusing on scaling, because we realize that if we want to create impact, we really need to see how innovations can scale within WFP in a specific country and across a number of geographies. Just wanted to share also a number of interesting recent facts from the accelerator. We have field innovation hubs in a number of countries, such as Tanzania, Jordan, and South Sudan. And we just opened our first regional innovation hub in Nairobi. Another interesting fact is that we are actually running our boot camps now in virtual mode. So actually next week, we're going to have our second boot camp. That's a 5-day program that instead of being in person and bringing the teams to Munich or to a different location, we're actually bringing them, we're all meeting online using all kinds of virtual facilitation tools. Just to mention an interesting fact, and I don't know if because this is an innovation network in FAO, I think it's worth mentioning. We've run a number of innovation boot camps for other entities, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But another interesting network, I don't know if you are aware of it, is something called UNIN, the UN Innovation Network. You actually can apply to it, and you get notifications, and they do different webinars. UNIN is co-led by WFP, UNICEF, and UNDP. And actually, last year we ran a boot camp for UNIN, and there was an FAO team attending this boot camp, and it was a project called VAPOR, looking into water digitalization. So we can move on to the next slide. I just wanted to give a bit of a background. And I wanted to mention some of the innovation principles that we work with. Some of the audience might know these, but I think it's always worth mentioning. We, on one side, really understand, let's say, the realities where WFP operates, but we try to use key innovation principles. One is called human-centered design, and that's when you're trying to design not based on Hila's conception of what is the need of a mother that we're solving her problem in Chad, but we actually need to speak to the user to whom we're solving their problem. So in this case, let's say we have a solution for mothers in Chad, we would go do on-the-ground research, understand the realities, and but with a very empathetic manner, not always the classic, let's say, survey modality, but really trying to understand through conversation, understand the reality of whoever's problem we're trying to solve. And the second methodology is the lean startup approach, where you focus on a specific problem, and you, by experimentation, you do iterations and repeated loops of feedback in order to check that the solution you're trying to solve is actually being addressed. And so those are two key principles that we use, and I will also share in the examples that I'm about to mention how we use these principles. So we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to give two examples of innovations that are at scaling, which is let's say the most advanced level in the accelerator. One project, it's called CODA. And this is really a fascinating example of really trying to solve a very a deep problem for colleagues in the field. When we do diverse nutrition interventions in WFP and other organizations as well, a lot of what happened historically is a lot of health and nutrition data of beneficiaries was tracked on paper. So you could imagine in a health clinic or in a point where WFP distribute foods, you would see piles and piles of paper containing information. And our colleagues in El Salvador who came to our boot camps and then other country offices as well, realized that they want to find an alternative solution. So instead of a family having their information on a piece of paper, what we gave them was a plastic card that has an NFC chip. And NFC is actually a technology that you can read from most mobile phones. And the health worker can put the information of whatever health intervention we are implementing through a device that they have. They can connect the card to the device, upload it to the device, and then we created an app that processes this data. What has happened through this, creating this innovation, we have reduced by 50% the administrative time that a health worker needs to spend in nutrition interventions. So you're just minimizing the amount of time they're spending on paperwork, which is great because that means that they can spend more time in receiving more patients. And then on the other side, we collect real-time data and can see certain trends. So for example, there was a case that we had in South Sudan where based on the data that we could collected on the CODA platform, we realized that we needed an intervention by UNICEF. And we could do this in real time because the data was digital, and it replaced months of processing of paperwork. Yeah, and the next innovation I wanted to share is actually H2Grow. I think this will probably be something that might be closer to FAO's colleagues' hearts, so I thought it would be a nice example to share. H2Grow uses a technology that WFP did not invent. It uses hydroponics. Hydroponics is when you grow food without soil, but with water and nutrients. The benefits of this technology and this, let's say, this type of innovation is that it can grow food, as we call it, in impossible places. Again, this was an idea of a colleague in Peru, where he wanted to create a program for women where they can grow food and then create an income by selling lettuce in the market. What was interesting, and this is where the scaling journey is fascinating in terms of innovation, a colleague from WFP Algeria heard about this innovation and said, wait, we want this in a different modality. And instead of growing food for human consumption through human-centered design, we decided to grow, the community requested to grow food for their livestock, because their livestock are their assets, are their income. And by growing barley for the livestock, their livestock lived longer, created more milk, had healthier baby goats. And the interesting part, we actually started with a very high-tech solution in Algeria. We brought in an old shipping container that had LED lighting and was quite big and was quite a cumbersome, let's say, logistics initiative to bring into the middle of the desert in Algeria. But then we realized this is too high tech and this is not actually replicable. So what happened was, one of the colleagues from Oxfam that was working with us on this project actually said, I can replicate this, but in a lower tech solution. And that was actually an interesting use case, because again, using human-centered design, we could understand what are the needs of each community. And also on the other side, we could also create something replicable and scalable. And it also reflects that actually the most innovative thing is actually not, as I mentioned with the shipping container, is actually not the most useful for a beneficiary. I wanted to also give the COVID angle to this innovation, because what we realized, I need to go one slide back, thanks, was that during COVID, one of the iterations of this project is that families can now grow food within their houses. So this is what we started in Chad. For safety reasons, women requested that they don't have a communal setup of H2Grow, but they grow the food in their houses. And then after fact that happened during COVID, when people needed to actually be socially distanced, what happened was that people actually could continue to grow food at home, have their nutrition from food they're growing at home while socially distancing. So that was actually a byproduct that we didn't expect, but has been actually a great win for H2Grow. So that's a few insights I wanted to share with you from the WFP Innovation Accelerator. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm happy to hear about it. And I'm also sharing a few information points. So if you want to learn more about our work, or if you want to see how FAO can connect to our work, feel free to reach out, and we'll be super happy to connect. And thanks again.
Hila, thank you very much for this presentation and for showing us actually how the Innovation Accelerator function and giving us a clear insight on what's going on in the field. Thank you very much. Our third and last presenter for today is Catherine Jones. So she is a national from New Zealand. She has been working with FAO for over 5 years. She started off as an emergency program officer in the sub-regional office for the Pacific Islands, and then moved to Rome in late 2016 to take on the role as early warning, early action specialist, where she mainly focuses on the Asia-Pacific region. Previously, she worked with UNDP in the field of climate change and food security, namely working and living in the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, and Samoa. Over to you, Catherine, for a presentation on using innovative methods to anticipate food crises.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So exactly, I'll be presenting on early warning, early action today, and it'll be separated kind of into two parts. First, I'm going to explain a little bit on what is early warning, early action, and then the second half of how is it innovative as well. So if you could flick me over to the next slide. So what you see here is two streams. The first one that we have on the top is your traditional humanitarian response. So how this kind of works is where we will see a risk increasing, we may prepare to respond, the disaster strikes, and then the work begins. But what early warning, early action tries to achieve is to change the flow of this traction. So as you see here, we have a critical input where we have early warning. So essentially, early warning can be broken down into various information sources. So this can be climate early warning, which can include forecast or temperature information. It can be socioeconomic data, such as food prices. It could be vulnerability and food security information. So bringing that all together to understand what is going to happen, so to anticipate a hazard. And the hazards we're anticipating can be both natural and human-induced. On the natural side, we're looking at droughts, cyclones, flooding, severe winter seasons. On the human-induced side, we can try to predict economic crisis, displacement, and even conflict. So using these information sources, and go back to the previous slide, Using these information sources or the early warning, they release an alarm, which allows us to mobilize funds quickly and timely to be able to implement early actions. So early actions as well are initiatives that are made to protect or mitigate the impact of humanitarian impact, on vulnerable communities. And these can range from unconditional cash transfers, livestock protection kits, or drought tolerant seas. It's all dependent on the hazard that is in question. So if you can move to the next slide now, thank you. So since 2015, FAO has been gearing and moving towards this model and implementing it within the humanitarian framework. And we've been working across a wide range of countries, as you can see from this map. It's very populated now, all the way from Latin America to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific. But what this has taught us is a lot of lessons learned in regards how to apply early warning, early action into different contexts, but also what works and what doesn't, and how we can move forward with this agenda. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So we've talked about what is early warning, early action, but how is it innovative? So I've broken this down into three sections, as you see here. So the first is early warning. So basically with advances in technology and information over these past 5 to 10 years, we've been really see that satellite data in particular has become more granular and more precise, and it allows us to understand hazards a lot more better than they did 10 years ago. So we can predict things a lot better than we able to do before. This is also combined with the digitalization of data collection. So you may have seen that we've moved towards mobile phones or Kobo Toolbox. This allows information to come in at a rapid pace now. So instead of waiting for maybe some paper-based surveys to be processed, we can now have it at our fingertips. And then lastly, we can use different streams of information. Perhaps in the past, we might have had access to maybe 1 or 2 different streams of information, but now we can have a range to a whole bunch that allows us to bring it together and have a more robust argument or understanding of a hazard that we're looking at. Secondly, looking at flexible financing, what the humanitarian architecture usually does is respond to disasters, and this is based on observed needs. However, we aim to change that by, instead of using an alarm and saying what we anticipate the needs to be, to release funding then and there, to be able to protect and mitigate rather than just respond. And then finally, we have the early actions themselves. These are really multi-purposeful and have a dual effect. One, we use these actions to protect development gains and resilience measures, but also hand the baton over to the response team and help them out as well on the other side. So it's a really cool interlock between the two. But most importantly, what makes this initiative innovative is that bringing these 3 layers together allows us to create a process that is changing the way that we manage humanitarian disasters. Next slide, please. So it's all good to talk about this in theory, but how does this relate in reality? So I'm going to take you quickly to the Philippines. where they are often impacted by a range of different hazards, and this can be cyclones and floods. But for our particular pilot that we did there, we focused on drought. So to take you back to the 2015-16 El Nino event, drought warnings were issued across the country in the Philippines, but they weren't acted upon. As a result, over 80% of the country had drought impacts felt, and $70.8 million worth of damages and losses were incurred by the agricultural sector. So we were inspired to work with the government to change the way that this has been processed. So during 2018, well, early 2018, we set up a drought early warning system, and this was monitored throughout the year. And by November 2018, it started to send some early warning signs to us and alarms. And this provoked us to act early, particularly in Mindanao, which is in the the south of the country, and is known as the breadbasket of the Philippines. And we acted quickly to safeguard rice farmers' livelihoods because they're the most at risk of that dry period. So we implemented a range of activities such as drought-tolerant seeds, irrigation kits, but also diversification of livelihoods to really protect their key assets. And what we found is that we managed to act 4 months before the peak of the drought. So a drought was not declared until March 2019, and we acted in November 2018. So there's a whole 4 months between the two periods. And not only that, we did a survey at the end of our project as well to understand the impact. And firstly, we understood that it was cost effective. So for every $1 we invested, had a return of up to $4.4. And also it kept food on the tables, families earning, and also did protect their assets at the end of the day. So if you want to move to the next slide. So what is the overall impact of early warning, early action? So keeping in theme with what I just described with the Philippines, we've found that it's really cost effective. And this is through empirical studies that we've done across the world, as you've seen with that map I just showed you. But we've done studies from Sudan to Mongolia, and we've seen that on average for every $1 we invest can have a return of up to $7 in avoided losses and added benefits. Furthermore to this, we've seen that collaboration is really key. We have really close collaboration efforts with WFP, IFRC, the START network, also OCHA, and this has allowed us to come together and shift the global agenda and incorporate early warning, early action into humanitarian practice. And this includes the Early Action Focused Task Force and the Risk Informed Early Action Initiative. But basically, these groups allow us to complement each other and to build a more robust system together. Also, we've, based on also this collaboration, we've been able to mainstream early warning, early action into the financing mechanisms for humanitarian response. And we're now piloting to understand how this works, particularly if you've maybe heard of the Fund Before the Surf, which is the key financial mechanism for humanitarian response within the UN. And finally, we've managed to have really cool shifts towards policy. And this includes IASC interagency frameworks, and particularly the one that we've just set up for the El Nino La Nina events. So country officers and people in the field know what to do based on a warning instead of just responding. And to my last slide, please. So I just wanted to kind of leave this presentation with some ideas that that have helped us grow over the past 5 years since we started early warning, early action back in 2015, and just to kind of provide a springboard there. So we have basically taken advantage of looking for gaps within the existing systems and where can we also be innovative and create new tools within the status quo. Further, follow advancements in technology. It can help inform your work. I think it's been extremely helpful for us, but I think in other areas it can also provide much needed information. And with these new advances, we're starting to understand trends a lot better. Take risks, be comfortable with uncertainty and failure. Like the lessons learned that we've had over the past 5 years have made it critical to be where we are today. Challenge the norm. Make sure you always just have a voice in everything that you might think is normal. Always just try to question it and see how we can do better. And then finally, collaborate. Make sure that we all are working together, both internally and externally, because we've seen that if we come together as have one voice, we have much more impact than acting alone. But thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass you back to Rachel.
Catherine, thank you so much for explaining to us what is early warning, early action, and all the country initiative, as well as the innovation it is going through. So that closes the first part of this session. Thank you so much to the presenters for these very insightful presentations. So we saw 3 questions for Kazuki in the chat box, but because of the time we have left, Kazuki will respond to your questions directly in the chat box. If you have more questions, you can still post them in the chat box, and we will send them directly to the presenters and post all the answers on Workplace on the FAO Youth chat. So next up, we have our Dare to Ask session with Dominique Burgeon, Director of the Emergency and Resilience Division at FAO. So let me introduce him shortly. Dominique has 25 years of professional experience, including in various leadership positions with FAO. Since November 2012, he has served as Director of FAO's Emergency and Resilience Division, and also led the FAO Corporate Strategic Program on increasing the resilience of agricultural-based livelihood to threats and crises. He has extensive experience in humanitarian and development assistance, including through his most recent field assessment as FAO representative in Bangladesh. Dominique has also served in Syria and at the UN headquarters in New York. So in order to make things smooth, you can ask your question in the chat box and we will read them out to Dominique. But Dominique, perhaps you would like to say a quick few words before we start the session?
Yes, thank you very much. And I have to turn off my camera because the connection is not very good, but I want to say hi to everybody. And I want to say, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think it's great. I think this the youth committee is definitely a great innovation in FAO. I think when I see also the topics you are discussing, I think I like very much the last slide of Catherine when she really gave us some directions. And actually, I would, she was saying, look for gaps, follow advancements, take risk, challenge the norm, and partner, collaborate. And I had a few points also, and it was, your session is there to ask, but I was thinking also in terms of dare to take risk, and I think you as the youth committee, you are there to be behind the new ambition of this organization. The challenge ahead of us is huge. I think when you look at the number of people in chronic food insecurity, but also from our side of the equation, the humanitarian challenge, when you look at, for example, the global report that we just issued, 135 million people in acute food insecurity, 55 countries, 27 million people on basically the verge of famine. I think it's really, the challenge is huge, and we have a responsibility. And we have a responsibility, us as management, to, I would say, create the enabling environment, but you have the responsibility as the youth to bring the energy, the ambition, and really help the organization fulfill its mandate, which is a great mandate. And with that, I think it's really a lot is on your shoulders, and this is why also we have created a similar committee within our team, PSC SP5. You know that in the proposal that is going to be discussed next week in the program committee, then for endorsement to the council, there is the establishment of a new office for emergency and resilience, which basically aims to build on the work that is being done by PSC and SP5, and which really aims at enabling us to go to another step, to be more predictable, to be more at scale, to reach more people. I mean, just to give you an idea, for the last couple of years, we reached about 25 to 30 million people a year out of these 100 million plus. We definitely need to go more in a more predictable way in more countries. So now we have this office, and obviously we have a reflection process going towards this office, and we were very keen to have also the youth, all the youth involved in the process. And I see, of course, there are a number of colleagues here, including Julia, who has been at the forefront, but many others, Rachel, also Anne-Claire V, and many others. So I think with such a team, we'll be able to change the way we do business, and at the end of the day, better serve those people who so desperately need it. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Dominique, for these really great words. So the floor is open for questions, and we already have a few. I will start with the first question for you, Dominique. What, if any, changes and innovations have been brought or should be brought to the emergency division's procedures in these sensitive times? Over to you.
Yes, there are many indeed. Well, the emergency division procedures in these sensitive times. First of all, I think in terms of innovation, I think the topic we are dealing with in this sensitive time, and especially if you look now at the COVID situation that we are facing, I think one of the main thing we are trying to, and this is quite a change for us, is that we are trying to get a much more precise idea of what the impact of COVID on the livelihood of communities in food security hotspot is. And the innovation we are working on in that context is that until now, FAO emergency and resilience work was very much relying on, I would say, secondary data. Now, for the first time, we are partnering with WFP, we are partnering with other, even private companies, to try to use remote data collection to be able to have a much more precise and, I would say, evolving picture of the impact of COVID-19 on the food security in these food security hotspots. Then working with a team in which Catherine is working on scenario planning to be able really to tailor responses at country level that are really concrete and meet the needs of the communities in need. So I think it is really we are changing the way we work as part of this response. I see there are many questions, so I could elaborate much more, but I think better touch on a couple of questions rather than having a whole thesis on one of them. I don't know how you want to handle it, Rachel.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Like that, we can go through more questions, and we have a second one for you who's more specific. So can you tell about innovative methods to catch and deal with locusts without pesticides? Over to you.
Well, locust, I mean, indeed, when you look at the work we are doing in emergencies and resilience these days, the two big topics, indeed, since the beginning of the year is locust that is currently affecting essentially the greater Horn of Africa, but which is also affecting Southwest Asia, Iran, Pakistan, even India. You have seen relatively scary images of India last few days. And now a potential threat to West Africa. So it's really a fight to control desert locusts in regions that are already highly food insecure. I mean, the last time we had such a situation was in 2003, 2005. In 2003, 2005, we had a response that was only control operations, basically airplane spraying chemical pesticides. We have learned from that. This time we have a two-track approach, which is one, still spraying on the ground and aerial spraying, and then in the meantime, protecting the livelihood of the communities that are affected. So it's already one big change is this combination of control with livelihood saving. But the big thing, the big enhancement, and coming specifically to that question, was that this time compared to 2003, 2005, is that we are increasing the use of biopesticides. So there has been huge progress being made in science, which enable us to access biopesticides. Unfortunately, they have essentially two limitations, not to go into too much detail, is that one, basically the availability of biopesticides is relatively limited, one, and two, the speed with which it acts takes a bit of time. So it means that we are using biopesticides in specific contexts, essentially in natural reserves, in very sensitive environments, and in the meantime, in countries like Somalia, where there is no registered pesticides. But I mean, for you all to know, I mean, yes, it's true we use pesticides, but the quantities that are being used are very, very minimum. And the technique that is being used by FAO for controlling locusts is called ULV, ultra low volume spraying. So it means it's between half a liter and a liter of pesticides sprayed per hectare, therefore limiting the impact on the environment. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. We have a third question for you. What are the main challenges to investing in innovation, especially in the most vulnerable contexts? Is it a lack of funding, an absence of adequate infrastructures, of coordination? How can we tackle these barriers to allow for innovations to flourish? Over to you.
Well, my sense honestly is that the presentation from the WFP colleague in that respect was very good, and I think that the work we are doing in working in emergencies is perhaps I mean an environment that is indeed prone to innovation. I think what I've seen over the years working in this area is that donors they are quite keen to invest in innovation, to allow us to test. And for example, last year we had a specific allocation from a given donor that enabled us to, for example, develop an app an Android app to basically be able to recognize fall armyworm attacks on plants and identify the stage it was and make recommendation. The same way we have been supported by the same donor to promote use of solar energy in Gaza Strip. You know, they have regular issues in terms of power supply, especially when it comes to greenhouses, etc. So we have been able to develop the use of solar energy. So, but when it comes to innovation, I think innovation is, and I think this is very much the FAO approach, is to say innovation can be tech, or innovation can also be sharing of knowledges from one country to another, from one community to another. So I think as part of the work we are trying to do on resilience, we have something called the CORE, which is the Knowledge on Resilience Platform, KORE. Somebody can perhaps put the link, which indeed presents all the good practices that we have identified in emergencies and resilience, and that can indeed be promoted in other contexts. In the context of COVID, this is also something we are trying. I mean, COVID is a completely new type of situation, new type of environment. We also need to innovate, but innovate also in terms of saying, okay, yes, in South Sudan, as we speak, we are promoting urban vegetable production, urban agriculture. Perhaps this type of urban agriculture, when there is confinement, can be promoted in other countries. How to do it? I mean, let's learn, let's share our knowledge. So I think, in short, I think our line of work offers plenty of opportunity for innovation. I'm sure now that with the arrival of a chief scientist in FAO, it will even be more possible to innovate and having that sort of approaches. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much. So we're going to take a last question for you, which is, how has FAO ensured that the current pandemic does not cover or put to the side all the other crises that are still ongoing?
Yeah, that's indeed a very good question. This is part of the advocacy we are having. Last week we had a meeting with the Africa regional group. You know that in FAO governance there are a number of regional groups, and they invited us to speak on the FAO response to COVID, and they were very keen to actually make sure that we do not lose sight of the other emergencies. As a matter of fact, before we entered this situation, I mean, we had already humanitarian response plan covering, I think, about 30 countries, and we were asking for about $900 million to provide livelihood-saving assistance to these countries. Of course, this needs to continue because it's also always important to remember that when I was referring to the 135 million people in acute food insecurity, this is a pre-COVID number. So it means that we have people that are affected by conflict, by climate extremes, as well as by economic shocks, by transboundary plant pests and diseases. These people, I mean, they still need support and assistance. And the COVID-19 is actually one more shock that is increasing their vulnerability. This is also why, I mean, we need to keep working on the root causes, you know, because I was referring to the 135 million, but what is clear is that for the last 4 years, we always have had over 100 million in that sort of situation. So 100 million people. Therefore, what we need is to reduce that number. And yes, humanitarian assistance is critical, but humanitarian assistance is by far not enough. We need to work on the root causes, and this is why the resilience agenda, I mean, promoting social protection, promoting disaster risk reduction, that sort of activities are so important and need to be embedded in what we do. And this is why, I mean, we need bright people, we need energies, and this is why we need a youth committee. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. This is really good. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us today, Dominique, and for your answers. This was really informative. So thanks again. And thank you all for your questions. I can see the time rolling, so I'd like to move on quickly to the final part of this session. Lindsay will share with us some updates on the Progress at FAO initiative that has been very successful at bringing together colleagues from all around the world. So over to you, Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. So it's me again with your Progress at FAO update. So you have all been enjoying the virtual random coffees so much, which we are so excited about. And it made us want to introduce another dynamic activity, this time in collaboration with IVF, the Interns, Volunteers, and Fellows Network at FAO. And this one is called Connecting Cooks. So as some of you may know, IVF at FAO headquarters would have weekly language lunches where they would exchange, teaching each other a different language every week. And then, of course, when we couldn't go to the office anymore and started teleworking, they couldn't have those lunches at headquarters anymore. And so they thought of another way to connect cultures that just came naturally to them, something that brings us all together always, which is food. So they started having a cooking class on Zoom a couple times a month where someone would volunteer to give a recipe. everyone would buy the ingredients a couple of days before, and then on the Zoom call, someone would volunteer to teach them how to cook this recipe. So since Progress at FAO is all about humanizing the way we work and connecting, we decided to partner and actually take this activity one step further with a collaborative cookbook where everyone can share their recipes. So it's actually a shared document on the OneDrive that we will give you if you'd like to contribute a recipe. And so it's kind of a collaborative way to share all of our different recipes from all our different cultures. So next Monday, June 8th, will be the first edition of Connecting Cooks, where I have actually decided to volunteer to be the cook and teach you how to make a traditional Tuscan dish. And please don't be intimidated. These recipes are very simple and great for cooks of any levels, from beginners to experts, or however you consider yourself. So please join in. If you're interested in teaching a class, contributing a recipe, or even just following along and cooking with us, please fill out this form that I will put in the chat now. And we hope to be cooking with you all soon.
Lindsay, thank you so much for this update, and let's hope colleagues will participate. It sounds really brilliant. So this brings us to the end of this session. Many thanks once again to the fantastic presenters and to Dominique for their interesting and insightful presentation and answers. Thanks again to the production team for their great support as always. And most of all, I want to thank all of you, all of the participants, for joining us today and for your dedication to energizing and innovating the way FAO works. And again, I'd like to remind you, if you'd like to support in any way, please write an email to youth-committee@fao.org, So, and this session, of course, was recorded and it will be available through the Youth Committee Workplace Group. So thank you again, everyone, and see you at the next Innovation Wednesdays. Thanks a lot.